In the studios now, Patrick Sullivan, the president of the Mississippi Energy Institute. Patrick, thanks for coming in.
Oh, good morning. It's good to be in the AC this morning.
Yeah, exactly. A little hot out there. Gonna get on up there again today, and of course that's all relevant to our conversation because that generally means we're consuming more electricity, and the electricity rates are up somewhat. I got my bill a couple of weeks ago. I think it's the highest I've ever had in my 13 years of the present home I live in. But is that a trend? What can we expect?
Well, it's painful. It's painful on all of us and everybody out there, and it's not just electricity. It's gasoline.
Yeah.
I know a few times recently I've set personal records at the gas pump. I drive an F-150. I have a big tank, but $140 to fill up, and we're going to start seeing it in natural gas prices as we get into the cool season, and seeing it in electricity, as you said. And, I think about and we may have some listeners out there now, how many people in Mississippi, commute from McGee to work in Jackson or Brookhaven to work in Jackson.
Yeah.
And you think about the impact of the thousands and thousands of people who drive 30 miles one way to work or more every day, and how that's impacting that household budget. It's painful, and it is important for us while we're in this situation, while we're not going to get out of it overnight, to understand why we got into it.
It's a good point because it's always occurred to me that in Mississippi, we generally do commute a fair amount. A lot of workers do, at least, as you say. There are workers that come, for example, here to central Mississippi that may work at Nissan or other facilities, other operations, and they travel hour a day on the roads, and that used to be kind of an affordable expense, and now that's become a major issue in their house.
It's just I looked at the data just the other day. Mississippi, on average, per capita drives more than about any other state in the nation.
Okay.
And for us, it's a work issue. It's a quality of life issue. A lot of us have places on the weekends where we go hunt and things. It's a getting in the car and going to the beach issue, and it's just it boils down to quality of life. But when we see prices having to pay double what we were just a year or two ago, I think we should ask what happened? How do we get here? And public policy is a big part of it. It's not all of it. There's a war in Russia and Ukraine right now. There's financial markets have an impact on that, but public policy is really important. And when you have a presidential administration who campaigns on the fact that they're going to stop all new development of oil and gas production, we need to understand what the impact of that's going to be, and we're seeing it right now.
Not just all new, but he announced on the campaign. We played the audio here on the program. Yes, I'm going to end fossil fuels. I'm putting the industry out of business, and he's made that very clear. And I think to a great extent that's just trying to appease those who want to see that happen. That most of which, of course, are in his party. But let's get into this a little bit because everybody, I think, can point to what they believe is the reason we're experiencing these extremely high, unprecedented high prices at the pump. Refining capacity is something that I've done a little bit of homework on. I'm trying to understand what in the world's going on in this country. How has that changed, say, pre-pandemic when we had $2 gas to now? And yet the refinery operations are saying we're running at 95% essentially, so we can't refine any more than we are now. And that seems like that's going to continue to be a bottleneck no matter how much more crude oil we produce.
Yeah, it turns out that the very first thing that we learned in that high school economics class, the relationship between supply and demand and price, it turns out to be true. And so what happened, if you go back, about 15 years, through new discoveries, we started producing more oil and gas in the U.S. And so supply went up, and really the supply went up so fast that the price collapsed. So the industry was a victim of its own success. And so there was a period there for a few years of hard times, low prices, a lot of losses and not profits in the industry. But from the consumer standpoint, it was ideal because that's what we want, right? We want low energy prices when we go to the gas pump or pay the electricity bill. And so what happened, supply went up, price went down, and then coming out of the pandemic, demand went up.
Right.
A lot of pent-up demand. Supply went down about the time the Biden administration came in.
Right.
And now here we see what's happening with price. And so, and there's, I'm oversimplifying it. There's a lot of variables and global issues, but it is supply-demand relationship. And, we were producing about, in the U.S., in 2005, we were producing about 5 million barrels a day in the U.S. of oil. That got up to about 13 million barrels a day in 2018. Now we're back down to a little over 11. But the problem with that is demand is higher now than it was
18, 19 million a day.
And I never thought I would see this, but we have a White House who's calling on OPEC to increase production, calling on Brazil and Venezuela to increase production rather than opt for policies that encourage production in the U.S. I think a lot of people think about the oil industry as the major oil companies like Exxon and Chevron, and those are great companies, but 80% of the oil and gas produced in the U.S., or over 80%, is from independent companies. These are mostly family-owned companies.
Right.
People we know that own these companies or work for these companies or vendors or suppliers for these companies. These are American jobs, and I look at it. You kind of look at the wage data and the types of jobs that are produced in this sector, and they're just irreplaceable.
Right.
You average out at $70,000-$80,000 a year. If you look at the commuter data, as we referenced earlier, there's you go into counties in South Mississippi, it's not uncommon at all. Most any county is going to have 100 or 200 guys who are working offshore, or working onshore in another part of the country, coming back. You're bringing that $80,000 wage, and it's just not you just can't replace that with a job locally. We'd like to, but you can't. And think about especially in those situations where that person, their highest level of education is a high school diploma. They're great at what they do. But they can't. You just can't replace that kind of opportunity with work back home, and that's ideal for Mississippi.
Yeah. Where do you see it going? I think everybody's waiting for some relief, and I think there's widespread view that if we just change the political leaders, that we'll see some sort of immediate relief in energy prices.
Unfortunately, there's not a faucet that you can just simply turn on anywhere. And in my opinion, we don't want to be dependent on OPEC. We were years and years ago, or 15 years ago or so, and we didn't like it then. I don't know why we want that now. And so I think it goes back to the lesson of understanding why we got here, and the right energy policy for these is policies that encourage access and production. Mm-hmm. We've got offshore production, exploration opportunities that the president and this administration have refused to open up. There's pipeline projects that they've thwarted, but I think also important to me, it's not just oil and gas. All this stuff works as a system. We talk about the electricity sector in Mississippi and a lot of states. A good bit more than half of our electricity is generated from natural gas, but we've got a Grand Gulf Nuclear Station over on the river. That's probably the cheapest source of generation in Mississippi today. That doesn't have an infinite life, and so now we've started to add some utility scale solar facilities. It's important to realize how these work together as a system. They're not independent, they don't compete with each, but they come together as a system. And so when you get situations like we have now, where you have high natural gas prices, you're not entirely dependent on one fuel source. Mm-hmm. And so where we made mistakes, and if there's any consolation here, it's that we do it better in Mississippi than most other places. Just go look at Europe, at what's happening in Europe right now. Go look at California. They are having not only price issues and way above what we're paying here, but reliability issues. Mm-hmm. And the reason that's happening is because they decided years ago to cut off certain sources of energy.
Yeah. Yeah, and looks like there's a move to do that even further. So we'll see where it all goes. Patrick, we appreciate you coming on. Very informative. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, good to see you.
Patrick Sullivan, president of the Mississippi Energy Institute, has been our guest here on Middays. We'll take a break and come right back.